Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine program we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. So you can go into your day and your weekend armed with information, fact-based, not just hyperbole. You have heard me say this before. I feel like what we're watching happening across the United States is if we were to invent a psychosomatic disease, it would be Munchausen's by government syndrome, where first the government makes our economy sick, and then the government officials say, hold it, we can fix this. And it seems to manifest in something called the PRO Act. And how could you be against something called the PRO Act? And you start to see the AFL-CIO is, and the American, well, look, Joe, it's bipartisan. The Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO support this. But there are at least, and there may be more, 60 groups who have signed on with Americans for Tax Reform to oppose the PRO Act. And to join us from Americans for Tax Reform is their policy analyst, Olivia Grady. Olivia, welcome to Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you doing?
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Not at all. Thank you for spearheading this. So, obviously, Americans for Tax Reform have for years been pushing for not no tax. And I love when I get into a debate with one of my friends who believes that the state is better suited to tell us how to live our lives. They say, oh, you just want no taxes. I said, no, I understand there are certain costs to, paying for a police department, making sure there's a justice system, those sorts of things. And so I understand that. But we just want to make sure that it's clear, transparent, and as efficiently run as possible. I don't know if that's a fool's errand or not. But first, Olivia, take us into this PRO Act and why do the Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO seem to be, so cheerfully supporting such a thing?
Yes, thank you. So the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, the PRO Act, was introduced on May 2nd by Representative Bobby Scott of Virginia and Senator Patty Murray of Washington. And there are now 208 Democrat House co-sponsors out of the 235 Democrats in the House, and there are 40 co-sponsors in the Senate. And so what this bill really is about giving more money and power to unions at the expense of American workers. And this is why we have such a big problem with it.
Oh, no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, the PRO Act has numerous bad provisions. In the Americans for Tax Reform letter, I just mentioned a few, but one, for example, is the joint employer rule, which is really an Obama administration National Labor Relations Board decision that expanded liability for businesses, and it would really harm the franchise industry. And actually, the International Franchise Association thinks that this would cost about $33 billion annually.
Wow.
And lead to 376,000 lost job opportunities. So that's just one bad provision. But another bad provision is the repealing right to work part of the bill. And that is not only a First Amendment freedom violation, right? We want workers to choose whether to join and support a union. We want
freedom of association, yeah. And freedom of association also means the freedom to not associate if I don't want to.
Exactly. But this also leads to, if you look at non-right-to-work states, studies show that right-to-work states have double the job growth that non-right-to-work states do. And then if you look at personal income growth, GDP growth, all of these economic factors will show that right-to-work states are prospering and doing much better than non-right-to-work states. Mm-hmm. So we'd love to make all of the United States right to work, not non-right to work.
And you look here, even with 8 years of progressive or 7 years of progressive governing on our executive branch, first with Terry McAuliffe and now with Governor Northam, and the Attorney General being one of the biggest. Let me jump in with every progressive organization and agenda I can find, including going after, the climate industry and things like that. We are still one of the best places for business, and I think that may only be because we're inoculated with right to work.
Exactly. I mean, there are a number of factors that go into why Virginia, was ranked fourth last year by Forbes for best states for business. But right to work is certainly an important factor, and my concern is, the right to work was passed in Virginia in 1947, a long time ago, and we're actually seeing at the state level movements by the Democrats to, repeal right to work in Virginia. So actually we're facing this both at the federal level and at the state level here in Virginia.
Now, I love the way these Orwellian bills are named, the Protecting the Right to Organize Act. Was anyone going after the right to organize? That's what I don't understand. If you write a bill like this, then there must have been a bill somewhere that was going to say, no association, stop that. Was anyone going to try to do that? Or is this just one of those like bait and switch, the name sounds so warm and fuzzy, how could we be against it?
Exactly. It's a bait and switch completely. If you want to join a union, please go ahead, join a union. But we just think that this bill goes, far beyond that. It's not about whether or not you can join a union. It's really about, as I said, more money and power to unions, and it harms workers. A lot of the other provisions in the bill are Obama era decisions, basically, and as we know, that led to higher unemployment and a stagnant economy. So we don't want to go back that direction.
Where have we? I mean, here in Virginia, in our 25th Senate district, which has got a competitive race for the first time in a long time memory, independent candidate was down in Covington talking to the union leaders at the paper mill there. And so, we here in a right to work state, it's not like we don't have unions. And as a matter of fact, he was pointing out that the union and management have a great relationship. I almost wonder if that isn't because we're a right to work state. And so the union and management have to agree on things and negotiate things rather than give me what I want or we're going on strike. Exactly.
When you give workers the option to choose whether or not to join the union and support it, unions have to actually work, to give workers, what they want, actually represent them rather than a situation where they're just, we already have these workers, we can just kind of do whatever we want.
Well, it's one of the things that, some organizations have always stayed non-union, not by policy, but by the fact that non-union workers are doing better than the union workers would. So why join one? And that's a competitive marketplace. This seems to go. I don't know if it was you and me, but in the years past, we've talked about right to work. And so one of the things that's always bothered me about labor unions is they get to act monopolistically, whereas the companies they work for can't by law. And so, what outside of whatever, Jimmy Hoffa movie might tell you otherwise, what's to keep another union from coming into, say, a paper mill in Virginia and saying, hey, we can do better for you than these guys? And then the employee seems to be the one that benefits from that if there's an option for better health care, better retirement plan, whatever the things that may be outside of just an hourly wage.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing to keep in mind also is that unions have been able to exempt themselves from other types of laws too in the states, whether it's harassment or stalking. They've been able to exempt themselves from a lot of laws.
We're visiting with Olivia Grady, policy analyst at Americans for Tax Reform, and the groups that have banded together to tell Congress to push back against the PRO Act, the Protecting the Right to Organize, as if somebody was coming out against it. Olivia, who are some of the other groups joining in with Americans for Tax Reform? And you can find out more about all of this at atr.org, I should mention there.
Yeah.
Who else is joining in with you guys?
Yeah, so we were very pleased with the turnout. We had Heritage Action, ALEC Action, the Goldwater Institute. We have a couple of Virginia groups as well, Freedom Works, Freedom Foundation, basically a number of state groups and federal groups have, national groups have joined together.
Is this, it sounds like if this bill were to try to be enacted, it would be unconstitutional in on its face. And of course, we'd have to go wind our way through. And thanks to the president's judicial appointments, we might even stand a chance of getting to the Supreme Court with the idea that this is contrary to the 10th Amendment. It's usurping states' rights.
Yeah, we'd have to see about that. But certainly, we're in a good place, after the Janus decision. We're in a great place on the courts, so we just have to see how that would play out.
Bobby Scott, being one of the co-authors of this bill, bringing it out, is sad because his district covers some of the more impoverished urban areas, certainly Richmond in that area and Petersburg, and as you go. And if anything shows the fruit of progressive economic policies since the 60s, tax heavily, go after businesses. I love the presidential candidates that act like businesses don't pay any taxes, which is laughable as well. Maybe we can spend some time on that. But if anything, Bobby Scott should be looking around his neighborhood and saying, I got to do better for my constituents, because as Virginia does better in economic output, Richmond and some of the areas in Bobby's district have struggled.
Yeah, absolutely. And this bill, unfortunately, would harm workers and those really lower income workers, particularly. I mean, you just have to, look at Detroit to realize that, we don't want to go in that direction.
Well, and it sounds good at the onset. Oh, we're going to force them to pay you more until the job goes away, or it sort of is the same disingenuous argument about forced higher minimum wages and then the next guy lost his job, not me, until it's your turn.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. And Americans for Tax Reform obviously is opposed to higher minimum wage for the fact that it would harm those at the bottom.
So the unions are behind all this. You mentioned the numbers and they're climbing. What is the chance that with all those co-sponsors in the House and Senate, this actually gets to the floor for a vote?
They are doing a markup tomorrow on the bill. So, I mean, you never know, but they seem to be moving forward. Ultimately, this is not going to pass the Senate, and obviously President Trump is not going to sign this bill. But I think our concern is just watching what happens at the state levels. California, they just passed AB 5, which is actually part of a provision of the bill. Actually, tries to codify the AB 5 bill, basically. So, and also we're looking at Virginia for their repeal of right to work, and also just looking at the presidential Democrat candidates. I mean, a number of them have mentioned their desire to repeal right to work. So, it's the problem is not so much this particular bill; it's just that these ideas are not going away, and we have to monitor them.
As we started this, I mentioned one of my favorite phrases, one of my favorite turns of a phrase, and I'm going to flesh it out someday when I have a few extra hours. But it's the concept of Munchausen's by government syndrome, and I'm not making light of people who actually have the ailment where they injure their children and to get attention. But it seems like this is what the government does: is we drive the economy down, and we create more poverty, and we create a bigger schism in between the middle class and the working class, and then the politicians swoop in and say, vote for me, I've got this great bill that's going to fix this all, when it's the bills that they've produced over the last 30, 40 years that have actually created this schism. Are from where you sit at Americans for Tax Reform and Grover and everyone who's done so much work there, are people getting this? It seemed like the president's popularity in some of these blue union states like Pennsylvania and Michigan and even Ohio are driven by people who are like, yeah, you know what? Things haven't gotten better since 65.
We're definitely, we're watching out for the workers. And I would point out, just take the recent GM strike. That's something we've been focusing on. And, and the union corruption at the UAW. And so we're, focused on making sure workers hear about, that a better option is giving them a right to work, right to choose whether to join their union, and just watching, the corruption.
Well, and certainly you see, the strike and it's protracted. And somebody asked me, well, would you support the president bailing out GM so that they can get back to work? I said, I worry. One of the places where President Trump has always been ambiguous, having been a builder in New York, I don't think he's ever really been a hardline anti-union guy. And I think he wants the best for everybody, however they do it. That's why I think he would agree with your position on this. But I wonder if it comes down to, do we let GM fail because the unions have asked for too much, and then maybe see something new and exciting grow in its place, or do we do another too big to fail? At ATR, is there concern that the president, as far as labor law is concerned, is a little bit of a wild card, in many ways the same way he was before we started to hear a little bit more about his views on abortion, for example? We really don't have a lot of history with him being, a pro right to work guy or anything like that. What is your feel there at Americans for Tax Reform regarding what the president might do if he's needed to, at very least, intervene and arbitrate something?
Right. Well, the president, has been very pro worker, and he's got a great team at the Labor Department. They've done a tremendous job. Currently acting secretary, Pat Bozzella, is terrific. And a lot of the times most people don't hear about the progress on labor policy, but it's tremendous. I mean, it's the reason why we're seeing, in part, obviously we love tax reform and a number of other, fewer regulations, but it's really the reason that we're seeing the 3.7 unemployment rate, which is an all-time low for the past 50 years. And
especially in the blue-collar trades and some of the blue-collar end of the economic spectrum, those jobs are coming in leaps and bounds.
Yeah, and they have been working hard at the Department of Labor and the NLRB to really overturn a lot of these bad Obama-era decisions. Right now, I mean, joint employers, I was talking about the NLRB is working on a new rule to fix that situation, and so they've been doing great work.
Well,
so
I'm
not worried about the president making a good decision for workers.
Well, thank you for giving us that to hang our hat on, Olivia. Keep up the great work. Keep adding to the groups. And a listener can go to atr.org to find out more about it. Contact your congressperson, whether it be a Morgan Griffith or an Abigail Spanberger, her too, or Denver Riggleman, wherever or whoever you may be represented by. If you know Bobby Scott's district, anyone in there, give them a call and talk to them about this. This is a very important position we're at, but I appreciate everything you guys are doing. Olivia, thank you so much, and you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. You too.
We'll be right back with more Freedom and Prosperity Radio right after this.